Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Railside Tales, Episode 4, James's Shortcut. James is a bright red engine. He likes to do important jobs. James thinks he knows the Sodor Railway better than anyone. One day, James was at Knapford Station waiting for Rosie. Rosie was late. James had to take Rosie's passengers on the Brendam docks. At last, Rosie arrived. "Oh, I'm sorry I'm late. I took a shortcut, but I got lost." "Huh," snorted James. "I never get lost. I know the railway better than any other engine." Just then, Sir Topham had arrived. "Some very important passengers and a group of workmen are waiting at Ulfstead Castle," he said. "The first engine to arrive at Ulfstead Castle will collect the very important passengers. The second will collect the workmen." James didn't want to pick up the workmen. He wanted to pick up the very important passengers. "I have to get more coal and water. See you at Ulfstead Castle, James." And Rosie steamed happily away. James was determined to arrive at Ulfstead Castle first, and he wheezed off. At Brendam Docks, James dropped off Rosie's passengers. Then he steamed off to Ulfstead Castle as fast as he could. James arrived at a junction. He could see Rosie ahead. James was worried, but then an idea flew into his funnel. "If I took a shortcut," he puffed to himself, "I will arrive at Ulfstead Castle before Rosie, and I won't get lost." So James took the other track. James steamed happily along his shortcut. He stopped at a signal. Stanley was in a siding. Stanley was surprised to find James so far from the main line. "Hi, are you lost? Would you like some help?" he asked. "No, thank you," huffed James. "I'm not lost." The signal changed, and James steamed away. James steamed further along his shortcut. "I should be at Ulfstead Castle by now," he thought. Then ahead, James saw a bridge. "Hooray! That must be the Ulfstead Castle Bridge." But under the bridge, it wasn't Ulfstead Castle. It was a repair yard. James saw Boko and Derek. Derek was having teething troubles again, and Boko had helped him to the repair yard to be repaired. They were surprised to find James so far from the main line. "Are you lost?" asked Boko. "Would you like some help?" asked Derek. "No, thank you," huffed James. "I'm not lost." James steamed on. Now he was more worried. His shortcut was taking longer and longer. Then James saw another bridge up ahead. "Hooray! Here's the Ulfstead Castle Bridge." But under the bridge, it wasn't Ulfstead Castle. It was the shunting yard of a quarry. James had never been here before. Then he heard Rosie's whistle coming from the track below. "Rosie's catching up," he huffed to himself. "I must race ahead." James pumped his pistons. Then there was trouble. Donald was shunting some freight cars of rocks. James biffed straight into them. The rocks started to roll down the hill. "Bust my boiler. Those rocks will block the lower track. I must stop Rosie." But James didn't know which track to take to find Rosie. James was lost. "What have you done?" asked Donald. James knew his shortcut hadn't worked. Now he needed to ask for help. "Can you help me, Donald? I have to get to the lower track as quickly as possible." Of course. Donald was happy to help. Soon the track was cleared, and James steamed away. He had to warn Rosie. James arrived at a fork in the track. He didn't know which way to go next. James saw Boko and Derek rolling towards him. "Please stop. I'm lost. I need to get to the lower track as quickly as possible." Boko and Derek were happy to help. "Take the left track." And James steamed away. James arrived at another fork in the track. He didn't know which way to go. Then he saw Stanley puffing over a bridge. "Please stop. I'm lost and I'm in a hurry." Stanley was happy to help. "You must take the track on the right." "Thank you." And James steamed on. At last, James puffed on to the lower track. He could see the rocks had fallen across Rosie's line. Then he saw Rosie coming around the bend. James blew his whistle long and loud. "Stop! Rosie, stop!" Rosie applied her brakes and screeched to a halt just in front of the rocks. Soon, Harvey arrived. He cleared the rocks in no time. "I'm sorry, Rosie," said James. "This is all my fault. I wanted to take a shortcut. I wanted to pick up the very important passengers. But now, I want you to collect them." Rosie smiled. Later, the very important passengers were all aboard Rosie's passenger cars. Rosie felt very proud. James arrived to pick up the workmen. "I won't be taking any shortcuts this time," he said. Rosie laughed, and James smiled at his new friend. And he knew that even though he didn't know the railway better than anyone else, he was still the brightest red engine on Sodor.